Hey everyone, welcome back once again to the MSF Private Podcast. I am still Michael Stephen Fuchs. So last time we covered the three darkest nights of the soul in my personal artist journey, which was a little dark, and we're going to get darker still today. A little more about the writer's journey. Specifically, this one is the time I quit writing forever for 6 weeks. So the writer and critic Charles Baxter has said, quote, "It seems a shame to say so, but the hardest part of being a writer is not the long hours of learning the craft, but learning how to survive the dark nights of the soul. I wish I could say my experience has been different, but it really hasn't. The dramatic story of the birth of my book, Black Squadron, a contemporary special operations action thriller, illustrates this perfectly. Not least because of the surprising fact that this book started life as a screenplay. Actually, it's even weirder than that. After the initial outline and note card stage of story design, I turned those note cards into a 60,000-word prose treatment, because that's what I heard James Cameron does before writing every one of his screenplays, and how the hell could Jim Cameron be wrong? So it turns out this long prose treatment phase is both completely brutal. You've got to know everything that happens in your story down to the finest level of detail, and also totally indispensable for the exact same reason. Anyway, then, after that, I did the work of writing it as a proper formatted original screenplay for a feature film, which was the whole game plan all along. But then the game plan went to hell, and in the end I reverse engineered the damn thing yet again and wrote a novelization of the screenplay, more about which in a second, which has become the book that is on sale now. Anyway, to back up a bit, or rather a lot, I had taken the entire first half of 2019 out to write this original screenplay, which was to be my very first. As many of my longtime readers know, I've been pretty tirelessly studying screenwriting for about a decade, mining it for the priceless secrets of storycraft it brings to fiction. Fiction, of course, being my day job. But I was always way too intimidated by the form of screenwriting, its brutal economy and elegance, to actually attempt an actual screenplay. But, once again, a funny thing happened on the way to the forum. As some of my readers also know, there's been low simmering interest in the ARISEN series, which, as you probably know, is my main series, a 25-book special operations military zombie apocalypse epic, as a film or television project for a good few years now. Although I advise you not to get too excited, the one thing I've learned is that nothing ever happens in Hollywood. Nothing, ever, other than talk. Anyway, around mid-2018, the simmer had started approaching something like a boil, and I figured, hey, if someone's got to take a crack at adapting ARISEN for the screen, it may as well be me, right? So I took a crack at it, writing a 65-page ARISEN pilot teleplay based on the first book in the series. And as it happened, I had really the honest experience doing that. It was easy. Well, I don't quite want to say it was easy, but it was definitely weirdly intuitive and felt right, and it all just worked. My best guess as to why is that during the decade of assiduously studying screenwriting for storycraft lessons, I had accidentally internalized all the other lessons of writing for the screen, the nuts and bolts ones, and it turns out I can do this. But this fact would have implications. And then another funny thing happened in this funny thing called life. So to back up a bit more, as you heard last time, I had recently completed the hardest job of work of my entire life, past, present, or future, namely finishing the main series of ARISEN. I just spent a whole year story designing the last two books, the climax and conclusion of the series, and banging out 1/3 words in a 100-day furious and deeply unhealthy writing paroxysm. And again, I know that was the hardest thing I will ever do, because if I tried anything like it again, it would definitely kill me. So anyway, by some complete miracle, I just pulled off finishing this 6-year, 16-book, 1.6 million word project, and was dazed and trying to recover from it, when I got a kind of out of the blue invitation to go and hang out in Colombia in South America with a friend. Turns out she had rented this beautiful, white, light-filled apartment overlooking the water in Cartagena, and she wanted some company for traveling around the country. And then, weirdly, going on to house sit in another beautiful place overlooking the ocean just outside LA. And once again, I said, yeah, hey, sure, why the hell not? What the hell else am I doing? As it turned out, what I probably should have been doing was reconnecting and belatedly putting down some roots in London, where I actually live. But I'm not so smart that way, and so I packed a huge trekking bag and took off. Also, I figured while I was in LA, I could take a few meetings, including with my one A-list Hollywood screenwriter buddy who first contacted me about the film rights to Arisen a few years earlier. We talked about that for about 5 minutes, then spent the next however many years rapping about writing and life and the writing life, and he became this wonderful part-time mentor to me, for which I will always be profoundly grateful. And anyway, the A-list Hollywood screenwriter buddy, who I think for present purposes I will call Edna, and who had also recently gotten a television development deal at Paramount, said to me, "Yeah, hey, come on out, we'll sit down, and you can pitch me your ideas." I hadn't known it, but this is what people in Hollywood, particularly writers, do. They pitch their ideas. You're supposed to have ideas. That's the whole point of you. And I couldn't bear to say back to this lovely man who had been so supportive of me, "What? Ideas? I don't have any freaking ideas." I spent every waking moment, and most of the sleeping ones, for the past 6 years, blowing my brains out on this one story, Arisen. I mean, that's it. This epic series seriously had over 500 named characters, with probably 24 of them needing to arc convincingly and successfully, plus scores of intertwining storylines that all needed to converge and resolve, and plus somehow needed to live up to and exceed all the dozens of gargantuan blasts of completely over-the-top action and emotion that came before, and finally wrap everything up with a couple dozen pitch-perfect bows. And you think I've been sitting around thinking up other ideas? New ideas? So yeah, I couldn't bear to tell Edna that, and so I had no idea what I was going to do when I got to LA. But then a funny thing happened on the way to the Lost City. As part of this weird and ill-advised trip, I had also signed on to a jungle trek into the Colombian interior, departing from a place called Marta on the coast and terminating in La Ciudad Perdida, the Lost City, in the deepest jungle. It's a lot like Machu Picchu, except only about, 5,000 people make it there every year rather than 1 million. I signed on to this because I thought it would make this whole weird random trip make more sense. I mean, I love trekking. It's what I do, right? And then, anyway, on this jungle trek into the Colombian interior had gone horribly wrong. Dominant themes included 95-degree heat, 100% humidity, deep sucking mud, giant reptiles and insects, plus literally 10,000 steps up to the Lost City, if you count a steep, scrabbly, slick, absurdly, perilously narrow little ledge of stone as a step. The horrifying conditions of the jungle encampments and general misery, and amidst all that, somehow, I miraculously found my ideas. There I was, lying in my little sleep cubby in a jungle encampment, underneath the mosquito netting that didn't remotely keep the mosquitoes out, my whole body slathered in mosquito goop, further slathered in sun goop, dripping with sweat from the heat and humidity, feeling completely disgusting, totally unable to sleep, when all these ideas just started hitting me. I mean, just one after the other, boom, boom, boom. Pretty soon I had my headlamp out, along with my pen and notebook, and maybe 2 hours later, I had pretty well fleshed out ideas for 4 television shows right in my genre. 4 good ideas, admittedly some better than others. Also, it turned out it was only 3 TV show ideas. As Edna later pointed out, one of them was actually closed-ended, a feature film rather than a series. And by the by, I never did make it to LA. After the jungle trek gone horribly wrong and I got back to Cartagena, I freaked the fuck out about what the hell I was even doing in Colombia, sweating to death in the high summer of the southern hemisphere and just waiting to die in a death-trap taxi with broken seatbelts and drivers who had patently lost the will to live and were on their phones nonstop, and a national motor vehicle fatality rate 9.5 times that of where I lived, and so I panic booked a flight back to London for the next day. But in the end, I pitched Edna my ideas on the phone. And not long after that, I decided to go ahead and develop the closed-ended one, the feature film. It was time, finally, fortified with the confidence from writing the Arisen teleplay, for me to sit down right there at the beginning of 2019 and finally attempt an original screenplay. But, jumping back yet again, and forgive this terrible story structuring, it's probably worth mentioning that I'd also just spent all of 2018 writing my first post-main series Arisen book, namely Arisen Odyssey. And this had just been, let me tell you, a profoundly terrible experience. You see, the whole time I was trying to finish the main series across all of 2017, I was also just nonstop whining and crying and begging, bargaining with any god that would listen, that if he just let me out from under this blighted, oppressive thing, the main series, I would never complain about anything ever again. If I could just somehow finish this horrendous, gigantic epic I'd stupidly saddled myself with, everything would be okay, and it would all be gravy after that. And I spent a lot of time and emotional energy fantasizing about the first non-main series book I would write. A nice single protagonist story, okay, maybe a dual protagonist story. A single unified linear story arc unrolling in a nice straight line. It was going to be so easy, it would write itself. Never again with the gigantic freaking epics with 500 named characters and dozens of stories. So help me dog. Well, as you're probably already guessing, it didn't turn out to be so easy after all, or even easy at all. It was, in fact, hard as hell. And it turns out this is because writing always just keeps getting harder. There are reasons for this, which I've written a lot about on my blog, and which are outside of the scope of this already way too long podcast. But anyway, I was just heartbroken about it. To finish the main series, to develop and maintain the focus that required, as noted last time, I'd basically put myself in isolation for a year. This was supposed to be the year when I rebuilt my life, friendships, work-life balance, and that whole plan just went to shit. Was writing Odyssey easier than finishing the main series? Yeah. Was it less all-consuming of my mind and spirit? Yep. But not a whole hell of a lot easier, and not a whole hell of a lot less all-consuming. I was pretty gutted. But fuck it, I said. Onward, that's done. New year. Let's just write the damn screenplay and see how that goes. And for the first few weeks, it went like a wonderful fever dream. Every morning I got up and worked on story design, and every afternoon I went out for a long run in the freezing sunshine. And the ideas, they just flowed and swirled and interconnected and metastasized and grew together. It was amazing. I was so jacked. And then, I got down to the hard work of weaving all these vaguely interconnected and metastatic ideas into something that cohered into something like a unified and logical story arc. And the complexity of the infinite possible story space, it's always there, lurking like the void, just stopped me in my tracks, floored me, stunned me like a bolt to the brain. I could kind of see my way through untangling all this horrendously complex shit, but I knew in my bones it was totally obvious that it was just going to be another killer job of work. Once again, I was looking at just a cognitively crushing series of tasks to have any hope of banging this into anything like usable shape. And I just couldn't face it. I couldn't. I was like, this just never stops being a total killer. Also, predictably enough, Odyssey had sold like, I don't know, a seventh of what the last two books in the main series had. And so I was also like, why the hell am I still doing this? My sales are in decline. My brain hurts all the time. This just keeps getting harder. It's making me miserable. And so, fuck it, I said. I'm out. And I meant it. I had no idea what I was going to do instead, but I sure knew it wasn't writing. I put the Scrivener file for the screenplay in a drawer, and I quit writing forever. For 6 weeks. I got up, during those 6 weeks, I got up every morning. I walked down to the banks of the River Thames, hung a right, and just kept taking longer and longer walks out the Thames path. I stopped at waterside pubs and drank a few beers. I worked on my Spanish on Rosetta Stone on my phone. Mainly I just watched the light change on the water and the riverbanks and the bridges spanning the water. I sat there and I watched the light change, and I tried to remember how to breathe. Obviously, eventually I had to find my way back to writing, and deep down I probably always knew I had to. This turned into its whole own pretty significant project, also outside of the scope of this podcast. But if you want to read more, it's in the How to Keep Doing It series of posts on my blog. I went back to a lot of foundational books that had inspired me in the first place and tried to figure out lessons for carrying on as an artist. Anyway, in the end, I finally took the Scrivener project back out, and I crashed and tore and clawed at the wild, impenetrable thickets of all those ideas and story strands, and I banged the son of a bitch into some kind of usable shape. The notes became outlines and beat cards. The beat cards became the 60,000-word prose story treatment, and that became a 135-page original screenplay, finally. But what happened after that was really shocking. Of course, the whole time I was working on this thing, I presumed if I pulled it off, if this screenplay was as great as I knew it could be, I could definitely get it at least looked at. I mean, there was Edna, for starters, my A-list Hollywood screenwriter buddy, and his agents at William Morris, whom I'd spoken with briefly. There was my Hollywood entertainment lawyer. I am by far his least important client, and I actually haven't heard from him in years now, but he signed me, so I was his client. Plus one or two other connections I'd made along the way. I'd get this thing into the hot hands of a few agents, development execs, producers. It would at least get a fair hearing. And by the time I was done writing it, I was convinced it was truly great, better than the last 50 movies I'd personally seen. It just blew the doors off most of what was out there. Yeah, I was a first-time screenwriter, but I was a first-timer with 20 years of experience writing military action and a decade of studying screenwriting, playwriting, teleplay writing, story structure, etc., etc. And this screenplay just blew the doors off. But then, suddenly, the like 4 people I knew in Hollywood all stopped returning my email. Please note, this is absolutely not to indict anybody in any way whatsoever. None of these people owe me anything. In the case of Edna, he's exactly the opposite of owing me anything. He's already done me kindnesses and good turns I can never repay. So, I never really expected the screenplay would get produced as a feature film. I had some hope that it might at least be purchased by a studio in a shamefully lucrative sale. But what I never expected, not for a minute, was that no one would ever even read the damn thing. Just damn, dude. So, that was a little disappointing. I sat around being disappointed and licking my wounds for a while, and then I got to work planning new ARISEN books that would, at least be read, plus pay the rent. And then it hit me, you know what? Screw these guys, namely Hollywood. Who the hell needs them? I've been making it as an independent author for the better part of a decade, free of my former publishing industry overlords. Why the hell do I want new overlords? I'm absolutely fine on my own. And you know what I can do? I can just novelize this bad boy, turn the screenplay into a book. The experience of novelization was also a pretty damn interesting one, but also out of scope for now. And then what? Then it will be published. The story will be out there, and it will be read, and we'll make some money, at least a little bit. Not least because I was very sure this was the best and strongest story I'd ever created in my life. This plan started to sound pretty good. And hey, I thought, who knows, maybe in an ironic turn, it'll even drum up some interest in the sale of the screenplay again. So, Black Squadron not only became a book that sold and was reviewed extraordinarily well, it even became an audiobook masterfully performed by the single best and most die-hard fan favorite audiobook narrator in the business, namely the immortal R.C. Bray. So, point being, I guess, is that sometimes things work out, just almost never the way you think they're going to. And sometimes, on the path of thorns that is the artist's journey, sometimes you just have to quit writing forever, for 6 weeks. Thanks all for listening. Until next time.